Welcome to the Advanced Sports Analytics Show. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. Blender Head, joined with me by the man behind the numbers at Advanced Sports Analytics. It's Stuart Gibson, who, based on last week, proved once again that if you fade the highest probability stacks, you probably lost, which is what I do. But hey, Stuart, Titans-Vikings, they put up 61 points. So I think we figured out why the total was so high.
Yeah. So it's interesting. We were talking about that when you brought it up last week. I was like looking through kind of our early projections and wasn't like seeing Titans guys, and I kind of quarterback is the first place I jumped to, and like wasn't seeing Tannehill towards the top. And I just went back through our data and I don't know, I must have edited like our file or something and dropped the last L from his name. So he wasn't appearing in the data, and then I went back and fixed it, and like sure enough, he kind of bubbled to the top as like top value quarterback.
Oh, so you literally took an L on it.
Yeah, I mean I did, and I played him in cash, and somehow played Rex Burkhead in cash, yet didn't cash.
How did you manage to do that?
I mean, I played Tannehill, Miles Sanders. I went Zeke instead of like Jonathan Taylor.
So essentially you missed out on Lockett, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I missed out on Lockett. Had Hopkins, had Thielen. I went, I guess, Thielen instead of Lockett. I forget exactly what their price differential was, but yeah, and played Giants defense, which didn't go well. Was thinking that, yeah, I mean, there's no one on San Francisco yet. They still managed to, put up 36. That hurt. But yeah, no, that Titans game got there. It was mostly through Henry, as we saw. Passing game didn't quite get it going. But yeah, it was funny. We were discussing that, and I we were equally, befuddled, and I was, even more so just because I wasn't finding, any projection on Ryan Tannehill. And then once I updated it, sure enough, I was like, oh yeah, okay, that was the game we talked about. And like,
well, the pieces you needed in that game were Khalif Raymond and Justin Jefferson. It wasn't actually the main players.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, look, I think we talked about on the show, like, the Seattle, that three player stack of Russ, Metcalf, Lockett just correlates super well. Very projectable total, and fading that hurt. Same thing could be said kind of the prior week with Dallas, Dak, Amari. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see what we got this week. There's definitely kind of a diverse mix of games that are viable candidates to really break the slate. So hopefully we can find the right ones, and maybe it's the top one, or maybe it's third one. Who knows? But
I've never seen a slate like this, because I mean, last week we had two games that was significantly higher total than everything else. Mm-hmm. We had the Seattle-Dallas game. You had the Arizona game. Like now, I mean, there's only 12 games on the slate because the Steelers-Titans game will not be played. 7 out of the 12 games on this slate have a 50 total or higher. So looking at early ownership projections that Jamino has had on the Thursday, which obviously will get better come Saturday. Jamino, if you don't know, if you're a premium member of RotoGrinders, he has his own show with Scott Hansen, called the Ownership Report. So on Saturday, they go over and they tweak ownership because they both of them do ownership. And you could listen to that. It's an hour-long show. Just if you're a cash game player, if you're a GPP player, it these early ownership projections aren't necessarily like what's going to be at the end, but that's a great show to listen to. So if you want to sign up for RotoGrinders Premium, rotogrinders.com/media/ASA. The link is in the description of the YouTube video. And you get a $5 off your first month of Core 4 premium subscription, NFL, MLB, NBA, PGA. But that's one of the unheralded shows. We do a lot of premium shows that Saturdays I always make sure to look at, because ownership in GPPs matters almost as much as meeting projection. But based on the ownership that we currently have, to me, there's no chalk game. Like, there are chalk players, but even like we have the highest ownership right now, about 25% on Alvin Kamara. And that obviously will depend if Michael Thomas plays, because that'll go down if he does. But outside of that, I mean, there are a couple of underpriced players that may get some ownership, but nothing stands out as like everyone's going to be targeting this one game or two games. I mean, they may get a little bit more lopsided ownership, but I mean, I legitimately think there are probably 8 games that are viable to stack on the slate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd have to assume with the wider mix of games that are stack viable, yeah, ownership will probably be down across the board.
But do you see I know you do top stack type of projections currently. I mean, obviously with practice reports and the pricing changes and totals could go up or down. Do you find that, because last week you showed that, that one game was like far and away higher percentage than any of the others? Do you find all of, like, out of like 7 or 8 games, are they much more closely condensed?
Yeah, so like last week we talked about, and it's kind of one of the first things I look at is like, where is the cliff in terms of, they're kind of like bunches of probabilities, and you're interested in like where the cliff is and where is kind of the subsequent team, like a full, percent, or 1.5% less likely to be the top scoring team. And I think last week it was like at like 3 or maybe 4. I feel like maybe like Indianapolis was third. And then like after in Indianapolis, there was, the next most likely team to top the slate in terms of, real football points. It was like a full, 1 to 2 percentage points less likely. So this week we currently have Dallas at 10%, Kansas City 9.1, Rams 8.9, Seattle 8.4, Houston 8.2, New Orleans 7.5, Baltimore 7.1. I mean, so that is 7 teams right there. And then after Baltimore, there's kind of this drop off down to Buffalo at 5.7. So that, 1.4% cliff that I'm kind of describing, we don't get until 7 teams down the, like implied total, I guess, scale or spectrum. So yeah, I mean, far, I guess, I'm not sure necessarily deeper is the right word, but certainly just more robust at the top of the point total scale this week than we saw in previous weeks. So when you see kind of the like slate properties like that, is your focus on, like, it sounds like last week, right, we had maybe 2 to 3 teams that were just like clearly, independent of any sort of ownership, like the preferred stacking options, and you maybe discuss like interesting ways to kind of get outside of that maybe 3 to 4 team bubble. When you do have a bubble that's like 7 to 8 teams, are you more inclined to try to like find stacks that fit just like on the inside of that bubble but aren't kind of at the top of the scale, or are you still kind of interested in teams that are kind of at the top of that implied point total scale but just outside of the perceived kind of most likely teams? I'm interested to just kind of hear like how the difference in just point totals across the board impacts your thinking about the slate as a whole.
Well, for me, it's mostly leverage. Like last week, since it was so much ownership on those 2 games, like if I fade that game, I could do whatever I want. Like I gained so much leverage by either last week fading Miles Sanders, fading the Kyler Hopkins type of combo, fading, not all of them combined, but just fading one of them. If I just said, I'm just going to fade the Seattle Dallas as a stack, like I could do whatever I want. Here, there's no clear, like, well, I'm going to fade chalk this game. Like I'm not gaining as much leverage by it. Like if I don't play the Browns Cowboys game and I play the Saints Lions game, I'm not get like the difference between 18% own this and 12% own that is not as dramatic. So I'm actually more likely to get different at the one-offs on this type of slate than the stacks, because the one-offs could be chalky. Like the difference between, like we may see, because they're underpriced. I think the Panthers against the Cardinals, I think we'll see fairly highly owned DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson, Mike Davis. Like I would be less inclined to play those guys as one-offs and not care that much about my stack ownership. If Kamara is going to be chalky with Michael Thomas out, I'll be more inclined to go under on him and play more Zeke as leverage off of Dallas stacks, or play more David Johnson off of Texan stacks, or play Kenyon Drake with maybe some recency bias, or go down and maybe play a Dalvin Cook instead of a Kamara, because I just don't think I'm getting in large field GPPs enough leverage. But there's no I'm not looking at a stack that is so obvious that I could just fade that and then make the best lineup. So I think my leverage points, I'm going to go primarily on pricing between those, top 7 to 8 games, and ownership is going to be less important to me on stacks this week. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does. I think last week we talked, like you said, a lot about ways to stack away from the obvious games. This week, it sounds like more willingness to have some shares of those obvious games, but get different in it makes sense.
Right, but to me, there's really no obvious games. I mean, I listen to shows around the industry. We have content at RotoGrinders, and it seems to be a mixed bag. Like you take a look at some and they go like, how do you not let Russ cook? How are you not taking the Seahawks? And then some people are just like, well, Deshaun Watson has had, 3 bad matchups, and now, he's underpriced, Fuller, Cooks, and like, how are you not taking the Texans? And then you have the Dallas, Dak's going to throw the ball, and the Browns, and how you not stacking that? Like I don't see like one thing standing out. The Chiefs we have on this slate. Like how you not playing like Edwards-Helaire? How you not playing Mahomes, Kelsey type of thing? So when I see so many a disparate amount of opinions, it's just a matter of how could I make 3+1s? How could I sometimes some of these you can make 2+2s? How could I make them in a way where my one-offs are not also the chalk? So like I can understand making, like for instance, if you make vomit stacks on this slate or cheaper stacks, I don't think you're making vomit stacks, but there are cheaper stacks in some of these higher total games. Like how am I doing that without playing like Zeke and Kamara in the lineup? Like how am I doing that? Or would it be better to play wide receiver in the flex in that type of lineup? So I'm like fading one of Kamara or Zeke, and I'm playing Lockett. I'm not playing a Seattle stack, but I'm playing Lockett as that player, a high-priced wide receiver as my flex spot. So from the games that we have down, I mean, they have 7 games that are 50+. And I mean, the 49 game, I mean, some of the line movement is ridiculous. That Bengals Jacksonville game opened at 44.5. It's up to 49 now. So a 4.5 points line movement is a lot. So like I consider that to be like part of the higher totals. Less so on the Rams Giants, only because they're 13-point favorites. So it's a little less appealing to me. I thought when you said the cliff, I thought the cliff would be on the Arizona Cardinals, because that would make sense, because that's where Cliff Clinsbury is.
Yeah, they're
that's where the cliff is. Why shouldn't it be where the Arizona Cardinals are?
I mean, there is kind of, I mean, I don't know. Arizona's 4.7, so a full percentage point underneath Buffalo. So maybe you could bunch Buffalo into that.
Well, because when you do those calculations for like the highest team, you're
Mhm.
considering only basically a 3-man stack, right? So it's like quarterback and 2 pass catchers. But like when you're stacking a game, so for instance, if you who do you have? What team do you have as the highest probability of being the top scoring on the slate?
Dallas.
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 Okay.
About
So if you're going to stack Dallas, that means you're probably playing OBJ, Landry, Chubb, someone on the Brown side. So it's not necessarily just like, do you look at, well, Dallas has the highest probability. Do you look at what the probability of the Browns are, or the Browns are not as relevant because you're just taking one correlative piece? You don't need the Browns to score 30 points. You just need one of their players to go off in a game where Dallas scores 35.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not factoring in the likelihood of the Browns topping the slate, but there are properties of the Browns team that get fed into this model. So pace of the Browns, their propensity to pass versus run, the kind of depth of their passing attack. Like these are Browns team properties that impact projection and simulation for the Cowboys, but it's not like I'm taking the Browns' likelihood and somehow feeding that into the Cowboys, if that makes sense.
No, yeah. The thing that concerns me about this game is Nick Chubb and Zeke Elliott. It concerns me because, like, the Browns, if they in this game, you have to expect that if it's close, they're going to want to run the ball as much as possible to keep Prescott off the field. And then if the Cowboys go up, I'm more concerned that they just feed Zeke 30 times. Like I look at this game between two teams that have good rushing. And yes, it has a 56 total, but I'm viewing this game more from the aspect, especially with the stacking partners that you have to for the Dallas, because Dallas, I mean, we had Cedric Wilson last week come out of nowhere. Like I'm less inclined. I'm more high in this game on Zeke and a low priced, because the Browns' primary targets are under 6K. OBJ's 5,800, Landry's 5,100, Hooper's 4,000. I'm not saying that I would necessarily want to take Baker Mayfield, but I mean, I could because he's under 6K. I'm just, out of all these games, I mean, it's the highest total, but I mean, we have other games that are close enough to it that I'm just concerned that if the teams rush the ball too much, that I'm just not going to get enough plays.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spend a lot of time talking about totals, but yeah, I mean, I think it's worth considering like how do teams typically achieve those high totals? I mean, like we spent a lot of time talking about Tennessee's total last week, and yeah, they got there. It just wasn't in a way that was conducive, to huge stacking. And like, Dallas has proven to be pretty, not concentrated, I guess, in the last couple of weeks as far as where their production comes from. Yeah, and I think Cleveland has, for at least the last year plus, been sometimes hard to pin down whether it's Landry or Odell, and now you add Hooper into the mix. You got the two running backs. I mean, yeah, it's a high total game, but there's also lots of pieces that could be kind of the core contributors to that total. So yeah, I think that's a viable point to call out. We're talking about these totals as if all teams are kind of created equal and are equal in terms of how they get to those totals, and both Dallas and Cleveland have properties that make it a little tough to feel super confident in the ways that those two teams might get to that high total. So yeah, I think that's an interesting call out, and yeah, I think one way I'll keep in mind come Sunday.
Right, but I could see, like, if I don't stack this game, to play Amari on one side, play 1-1 Amari and then OBJ, or do something like that. But I have to consider the stack as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think, I mean, it doesn't mean I don't play, it's just that they're expensive. Like the Cowboys stack, even without Zeke, you're playing Prescott, Cooper, Gallup, Lamb, it costs a lot, and it's negatively correlated with Zeke. So like if Zeke gets too much of the production, the stack is going to fail. It's not going to score high enough, especially on a slate where we have other totals. It's not like this game is 56 and then the next game is 48. Like we have 54s, 53s. So like I need all the production. I need Zeke to have a bad game.
Yeah.
And so like if I'm playing the stack, that means I'll be light on Zeke, but I think the Cowboys may be over-owned. No one's going to be that over-owned because everything's going to be spread out. But
Yeah.
I just think with recency bias, Dak will be a little over-owned. Amari at home because that's a narrative. Gallup after a good game. We have this narrative that, like Lamb was hurt or whatever. Maybe his ownership goes down. Just that they have so many pieces. I feel like I need to get the pieces. I need to get two things right. I need to make sure that Zeke doesn't suck out production. I have to make sure that the Browns don't rush the ball 35 times. And I have to make sure that if that happens, I get the right pieces of the stack right, where Cedric Wilson doesn't have 2 touchdowns out of the blue. I think that the confluence of all of those makes me lean to more towards taking pieces of the game and not stacking them.
Yeah. No, I agree with the kind of figuring out the pieces. I think that's a challenge. I mean, but I don't know. I don't think like Dallas is insanely expensive. I mean, they're the same price as, Mahomes. Like I'm looking just like at basic, Dak, Cooper, Gallup, same price as Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey with, 10% higher, 1 percentage point, 10%, more likely to, top the slate in terms of points, like same price as that Kansas City stack, cheaper than Russ, Lockett, Metcalf, cheaper than, if Thomas plays and you wanted to try to go like Breeze, Kamara, Thomas, cheaper than Lamar, Brown, Andrews. So, look, it's not a cheap stack, but I think there are more expensive options that have more expensive stacks that have kind of at least, and at least per our simulation, less likelihood of kind of putting up the most points. But some of those stacks that I did mention are like, a little more concentrated than Dallas. So, I guess in that regard, in paying a little more for kind of pieces of a stack, you are buying a little more certainty that kind of the points, the fantasy points, correlated with the real points will come through, the pieces of that stack.
Well, but that's the main reason why I like the next game, 54.5 total, Texans Vikings. To me, that's more towards the vomit stack range because Watson is 6,600, Fuller is 5,900, and Cooks is 4,500. You got Cobb in there. David Johnson's under 6K. And when it comes to the Vikings, it's pretty much Cook, Thielen. I mean, now Jefferson's come out. He's 5,200. Maybe he puts up a good game again. The pieces of this game are cheaper, and it feels as condensed as the at least of the Cowboys Browns game. But I don't have to pay nearly 7K for a receiver. So like pairing doing a stack like Watson plus Fuller plus one of Cooks or Cobb, and then running it back with Cook or Thielen for the price at the 54.5 total. I now have salary that I could have good one. I could play Cooper as a one-off in that lineup because I have salary. I could play Kamara or Thomas if he plays. I could play Kelsey. Because I'm spending down, I'm still getting primary receivers on the team. So like I'm more inclined, in this game, because the concern in this game exists the same. Because the Texans have had horrible matchups. I think David Johnson, if Duke Johnson does not play, if he's going to be in the backfield 95% of the time, like you could put him in the stack with Watson if you want, but we have concerns that, well, what happens if they rush the ball too much? What happens if Dalvin Cook, 25 carries? Are we going to get enough plays in this game? The thing that mitigates that is the price. I just think the pieces of this game are cheaper. So if it's not going to be that dramatically different from the Cowboys Browns, like I'm much more likely to take more pieces and more stack this game more than just take its pieces.
Yeah, I mean, it easily like the best priced, stack of kind of these core teams. Like we have Houston as 8.2% chance of scoring the most points on the slate. Watson, Fuller, Cooks, 17K to stack up. Seattle just 8.4%, barely better, than Houston. Russ Lock at Metcalf, 21.6K, like, 4.5K difference. Like, that's huge. I mean, the pricing on the Houston side, I agree, is the most intriguing. The Yeah, and I mean, I think this is a really good spot to stack. Watson has correlated historically really well with the production of opposing offenses. Like, if Minnesota can get going, there's a good chance that Watson is going to be able to benefit correlatively. From that, and or vice versa. If Watson gets going, historically it has pushed other offenses to kind of overachieve. Yeah, I think figuring out like which and how many of if you want to go the Houston side, I think will be crucial. Like, we don't really have many data points on kind of the relationship between Cooks and Fuller, or Fuller and Cobb. But looking back to 2019, like there weren't too many instances where the Houston offense supported multiple wide receivers achieving really strong games.
Yeah, but they had Hopkins. Hopkins ate everything. So I mean, that
And
makes sense. Just like the Packers, like when Devontae Adams is healthy, like they can't support more than just him at his price. So do the Texans, all the stats that you have on the Texans with Hopkins? I mean, that he's an alpha receiver.
yeah,
It's kind of hard to compare that.
it is a different receiving core. So I do have trouble making sense of kind of what the dynamic is going to be between those pass catchers. Another team we might talk to about later, Cincinnati, just so few like sample that it's really difficult to kind of parse out what the relationship is between the pieces. Yeah, I think it's an interesting kind of decision where you can decide to go two guys on Houston and go maybe two receivers, or like David Johnson plus Fuller. I think it's even potentially an opportunity to go with like a one pass catcher skinny stack and come back on the other side with someone from Minnesota. But yeah, definitely agree with you. This is like the best priced game of these kind of top tier games we're talking about. And I think Houston, at least so far, has shown at times that they can be pretty condensed in their production. So yeah, definitely intrigued by this spot.
Yeah, but I'm not intrigued by the other side. I think if you played, let's say you played Cousins, Thielen, Jefferson, David Johnson, or Fuller, like I think that it's a much less probability that the high in a shootout, the higher scoring quarterback is going to be Watson, not Cousins.
Yeah.
I don't see in a game where Cousins has to throw for 300 yards. I think Watson ends up outscoring him anyway. So like
Yeah.
I know I played Kirk Cousins at 1% owned last week in that Titans Vikings game, but I think just based on the pricing here, like having Cooks as a one-off run back at 4,500 seems to not make sense. I'd be much more inclined to take the price savings, and if Cooks has a good game, Watson probably outscores Cousins. So why aren't I just playing Cousins? And then I could just use Cook and Thielen as the run backs in those stacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
How about let's go to a dome game. Not the Superdome. Saints Lions 54 total. Obviously we don't know if Michael Thomas is going to play. He's 7,600 on Draftkings. If he's 100%, like
yeah.
7,600 is 2,000 underpriced. Kamara's 8,000. If Thomas doesn't play, he's 2,000 underpriced. Kamara will be chalk. He may be the highest owned player on the slate if Thomas doesn't play. Even if Thomas does play, here's the problem with the Saints. I'm not going to mention the problem being Breeze has a noodle arm. Okay, I'm not going to mention that. How do you stack the Saints? Because outside of Kamara, like Sanders doesn't seem to get enough work. Traquan Smith doesn't have like a high A dot or anything. They spread it around. Cook could catch a ball. They have tight ends. They have Taysom Hill. They got a whole bunch of stuff going on. If Breeze is going to have a 300-yard game, it's going to support more than just Kamara. It's someone else is going to have to do well because Breeze's A dot, the tar is low. So, like, it's going to be yak. It's going to be a lot of yards after the catch. So, Breeze is not going to be popular. Kamara is. You could play them both together. I mean, if Kamara gets 12 receptions, I mean, Breeze gets points for that. But then on the other side of the game, you have Stafford. Jones is down to 4,900. Galladay is under 6K. You still have Hawkinson there. Do you see a case where in this game, it's while the Saints have a more likely to being the highest scoring team, the correlation of the stack doesn't fit together as well with the price, and that it's maybe more fruitful to play the Lions as the stack and then use Kamara, or if Thomas plays Thomas, as the one run back. Because on a slate with this many high totals, I just can't see Breeze being the highest scoring quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, the Saints, like their offense just both in the way that Breeze passes the ball and kind of the distribution of throws, like it just really disproportionately benefits the Saints receivers, relative to the benefit it provides Breeze. Like if Kamara goes 10 catches, 90 yards, that's like a great game for him, but like that doesn't really help out Breeze that much unless, like 2 of those catches are touchdowns and somehow, Breeze puts up other, yardage to, like you said, like other players. So yeah, I guess, Breeze is, cheap. But I don't really see how he's going to be able to, like, I guess the way in which he puts up a massive game is almost kind of like the Watson Cousins thing. If Breeze gets to 300 yards, there must be like a ton of production on the Detroit side where, Galladay catches a long ball, or, Jones puts up multiple touchdowns or something like that. Hawkinson catches 2 touchdowns kind of thing. I mean, yeah, I think that seems sensible to me. I do think Kamara is in a great spot and, figures to be a quite strong play, but, his like ceiling game isn't like it doesn't a Kamara ceiling game doesn't really imply a Breeze ceiling game the way like a Galladay ceiling game is more likely to imply a Stafford ceiling game.
Right, it's more likely that Kamara's ceiling is almost more correlative to the Saints being behind, if anything.
Yeah.
And with them being behind, Breeze doesn't hit 300 yards.
Yeah.
Like I see a case where if Kamara has a big game or the Saints skill position players have a good game, Stafford has more yards thrown than Breeze.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that seems super likely.
Okay. Seattle, Miami, 54 total. This game is going to be popular because if I had to pick a chalk game, it's going to be this because of the total. The Seahawks have a 30.25 implied total. We could, who it is. It's Russ. It's Russell Wilson. It's Tyler Lockett. It's DK Metcalf. We got Carson may play. Hyde was limited. We don't know what's going on with their backfield. Obviously, we have Fitzmagic on the other side, who tends to get into shootouts also. If the Dolphins are playing from behind, Fitzpatrick has no problem chucking the ball up 50 times. You got Parker on that side. You got Preston Williams, Gesicki. You got a little bit more pieces on the Miami side than you do on the Seattle side. But, and you've said multiple times that Lockett and Metcalf are actually correlative to each other ceiling-wise, which we don't see that often with receivers that are that high price. Because now the prices are coming up. They were 66 and 6,500 last week. Now they're moving up a couple of hundred. I'm most likely, I said this last week, Stu, most likely having no Seahawks stacks. Only because of the ownership. I mean, I'm taking a look at early ownership, and Lockett 15%, Metcalf 13%, Russell Wilson is the highest owned quarterback. Obviously, in GPP, those will correlate with one another. Like, it's not like 13% Lockett is not with the 15% Metcalf. Like, they're probably together. Most of that is overlap.
Yeah.
So, like, the combination, that stack combination, since it's so obvious, because at least with the Cowboys, you can make different variations that won't be, some people will have Cooper, some people will have Gallup, some people will have Lamb. They'll be kind of mixed around. Compared to the ownership and the price, I'm less. The problem is with this, I would normally say, if I wanted to stack this game, why don't I take Fitzpatrick? Why don't I take Fitzpatrick, Parker, and Gesicki or something, and then run it back with Lockett? But the problem is, and I think that you've shown this before, that if this game like the only way Fitzpatrick gets to be in a shootout is if Russell Wilson is thrown for 4+ touchdowns anyway, and you might as well play the Seattle side.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about, trying to find kind of nice one-offs that, are part of games that we want, pieces of. It does seem like a kind of tall task to figure that out with Seattle, because it's like, okay, if we want, a one-off of Lockett and that succeeds as a one-off, like, if Lockett hits a ceiling game, it's probably because, Russ is also achieving a ceiling game. And because of the correlation that we've seen between Metcalf and Lockett, there's reason to be concerned that, like, if Lockett blows up, that just like all the other two guys are also going to blow up. And in that case, like, having just one of them, really isn't going to help you leapfrog, the lineups that have all three. But with that correlation, like, if Lockett has if Russ has a terrible game, really all two of the entire, like, stack is going to, they kind of like the stack either, rises to the top together or sinks to the bottom together. And at that price point, like, it's a very heavy stack that, if it gets there like it did last week, great, you have all the money. But, if it falls apart, it's likely that they're really all three are just going to fall apart in a way that prevents, any person who has, any lineup that has those three pieces, just totally prevents them from doing anything. So,
and also it's an ownership thing. So, like, I take a look. I usually don't like playing expensive stacks for that reason, that, like, they all have to, everything has to be perfect, and they all have to get there because they're higher salary. That I take a look at the difference between Seattle and Kansas City and go, would it be better to play 15% own Wilson, 15% own Lockett, 15% own Metcalf, or do I play 8% own Mahomes and 12% own Kelsey and 4% own Tyreek Hill or something like that? That, yes, the Seattle stack is more correlative. I get it. There are more pieces. Watkins could get a touchdown. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, gets in the mix. So it's not as straightforward. But in comparison to the ownership, I think the more interesting thing, only because I've heard it around the industry, talking about Fitzpatrick, the correlation between a Fitzpatrick Dolphin stack ceiling game, to me, means that Russell Wilson has outscored him. Like, to me, I don't see Seattle, them putting up enough points where Dolphins are just chucking the ball, where it came on 3 Carlos Hyde touchdowns. Like, the game would be too slow at that point. Like, the game would already be in the fourth quarter. Like, I'm more interested, depending on the status of their backfield. Like, if Carson's going to play, I don't want any of them, probably. If he's limited and then they'll share. But, like, Carlos Hyde, no one wants to play him. It's the type of thing that in normal DFS, Carson's down. Who's his replacement? He's 20% owned. Hyde is being projected as under 5% owned, or Travis Homer or something like that. That getting leverage off of the Seattle stacks by playing the running back as a one-off, I seem more likely to do that. But I think that what I'm trying to parse together is that, is it a mistake to play this game as a Fitzpatrick stack, because to hit the ceiling, it's most likely that Seattle has put up 4 or 5 touchdowns, and it's all condensed through 3 guys. That if Fitzpatrick has 30 points and Parker has 25 points and Gesicki has 20 points, yeah, they're a little bit cheaper, but the Seahawks stack has just blown everyone out of the water at that point.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that there's been a lot of hype around kind of Fitzpatrick as a, pusher of, opposition stack. I mean, I'm just like pulling it up right now and looking at Fitzpatrick. So I'm, in our app, we have like these 2 player sets. So I'm looking at Fitzpatrick, and I just like typed in Stafford, since he's kind of the guy we just recently discussed. Looking at those 2 guys' correlation with the production of the cumulative production, fantasy production of their opposing offenses. And I mean, Fitzpatrick in Miami, 0.18, like isn't, I think, not super high for kind of quarterbacks correlation with opponent. In Tampa, he, at least in the 2018 season, only had 0.23, not super high. I mean, Stafford back to 2018 has had a correlation with cumulative opposing offense production of 0.38. Like, I don't know. I think back to that Cincinnati Miami game last year, where it was like Fitzpatrick and Dalton just going against each other like crazy. But I mean, the data that I'm looking at would suggest that Fitzpatrick doesn't correlate as well with opposing offenses as maybe people believe.
Well, they just view him as a slinger. That the bad defense, they have to come back. They're down 3 touchdowns, and we've seen him throw up 450. It's all garbage time stuff, but they're not realizing that, like, yes, he's getting garbage time yardage, and maybe Devontae Parker gets a 100-yard game and a touchdown, but not realizing that, like, the opposing side has not succeeded in that case.
Yeah, and that must be what it is, because like, it is weird. Like, I have it kind of just racking, my mind. Like, that makes sense. I definitely think of Fitzpatrick as a, the losing quarterback in just a game shootout. But like, I mean, I'm looking at the data right now, and that doesn't seem to be the case. So maybe, maybe that is what, you're describing, is like his opposition, like runs the ball and kind of, I don't know. It's interesting that
that's why I said it's weird to say.
Yeah.
Because of leverage and because of how those correlations don't seem to work out. I'm more interested in the rushing. I'm more interested in Hyde. I'm more interested in Myles Gaskin. He's been getting 80+% of the snaps. He's getting passes out of the backfield. He's 5K, and not playing them together or anything. But maybe this game like goes under. Seattle gets to a 2-touchdown lead, and so they start running the ball more, and it's not a big enough lead for the Dolphins to start slinging it. So it's a lot of dump offs to Gaskin and stuff like that. He's been getting red zone touches that instead of stacking the game, I'll take not both of them in the same lineup, but I'll take a shot on Hyde. I'll take a shot on Gaskin, and that's leverage off of, because Fitzpatrick's going to be owned. He's going to be, he's not going to be 3% owned. He's going to be owned this slate. So Parker's going to be owned. Gesicki's going to be owned. So the natural leverage is just doesn't seem like anyone's playing the running backs.
Yeah. No, I like that Gaskin call. I thought I kind of enjoyed that Thursday night game last week. It really showcased 2 running backs, and now I think James Robinson's really, he had a great game and kind of is getting that buzz. But man, Gaskin and Robinson were just like dominating their team's opportunities, and I like Gaskin a lot. I think with this game, I mean, for me, what it comes down to is that there's really great correlation properties on the Seattle side, but unlike last week, they're not projected for as high of a total relative to the slate this week. And they're very expensive. I'm a little more intrigued by either going up or down, kind of in that direction. Going up, and I'm saying up or down in reference to implied total. Going up to Kansas City stack, which is a little less, actually like 1,500 less expensive, or, going down in, probability of kind of putting up the most points down to Houston, where it's just like way cheaper. Just kind of my thoughts, but there do seem to be some flaws in kind of consideration of the Seattle side, mostly for me around price and ownership, like you talked about, is that's a cost in its own way. So
that's why I like the next game. Okay, I heard your list on top stacks. They're not coming in as high. Bills Raiders. This game opened at 49.5. It's now up to 52.5. It's a 3-point spread. I take a look at this game. We have Ruggs is out. Edwards is now out. Okay. I take a look at this game. John Brown may be out. Josh Allen is going to go overlooked again. It's going to be 5% owned. He could obviously get there in multiple ways. We got Stephon Diggs at 6,800. Gabriel Davis at 3,200. On the Raiders side, you got Jacobs, you got Waller, you got Renfro. That's pretty much it. I mean, I guess you could throw in Aguilar. He's 3,500 if you want to take a shot. I just say for the price consideration and the total and how they correlate. I mean, we've seen when Josh Allen puts up a big game, like the other side has to come through. I mean, like I'm not playing Carr in this game. And with Allen, I could play skinny stacks because Allen could rush for 2 touchdowns and maybe he doesn't support 2 receivers. But with if John Brown's out, the second receivers that he's going to have are going to be really cheap. So like Gabriel Davis doesn't have to do much to get there at 3,200. Diggs does, but I think Josh Jacobs is going to be under 5% owned. I think you could play. I think you could, I could identify all the pieces. Most of them are cheaper. I can play skinny stacks with Allen. I could play him naked even. I don't have to play Allen Diggs. I could play Allen with no one. I could play Allen, and I could play Renfro and Waller together because Allen is the higher scoring quarterback than Carr. Waller has 100 yards on 13 receptions and a touchdown. Renfro, who else are they throwing the ball to? I just take a look and it's the Texans are going to be more popular. So I take a look at this and go, why can't the Bills and Raiders be that high scoring game? The only concern I have about players in this game is that the correlation of Josh Jacobs to a ceiling game on the other side, because he tends to be more of the workhorse, where if Josh Jacobs has 30 touches, this game has probably gone under. So, but he's going to be 5% owned. So do I play him and hope that he gets third down rolls and he's getting like 7 targets out of the backfield? Because if I could go on that, I think I could play this whole stack as a ceiling game. I'm trying to figure out whether or not Jacobs is a piece of that. Can I play Allen, Jacobs, Diggs? Or should I only be can I play Allen, Jacobs, Diggs, Waller? Or should I be removing Jacobs from any stack consideration?
I wish I had I just was typing in Jacobs into our app, and I'm seeing we have like a naming discrepancy where the Raiders moving from Oakland to Las Vegas has messed up data operations in a not insignificant way. So I only have like 3 games of Jacobs versus opponent sample because of this transit, naming team abbreviation transition. So I wish I had more of a concrete answer for you. I mean, I'm seeing so far in 2020, I guess that's what we can talk about, in the 3 games of 2020, which, I mean, considering 3 games for correlation purposes is pretty thin. But he has positively correlated with opposing offenses. He has seen more of a role. Well, I know it was kind of widely talked about after week 1, his role in the passing game. Not sure if that has continued, but let's see. Yeah, I mean, he had 20% target share week 1, and then between 8 and 12.5 week 3, 12.5%. So, I mean, yeah, Jacobs, I think he's being used this year in a little more of a way that maybe is conducive to, what you might consider positive correlation with, opposing team scoring and kind of pace. I do like, that Buffalo side. I probably would just be keying on Waller as the piece kind of opposite Allen and Diggs. And Gabriel Davis, interesting call if Brown's out. He was pretty productive last week, and seems to be a competent receiver. And Buffalo, they're not, again, it kind of depends on where you consider to be this cliff of like what teams are inside the kind of in very much in the mix for being a slate breaker. Buffalo's kind of like either just inside or just outside, depending on kind of where you determine that that cliff to lie. But Allen he's been awesome this year. It gives you rushing upside. So, considering just like a skinny stack of Allen, Diggs, Waller bring back, I think is certainly in play. Correlatively, Allen has correlated really well with his primary receivers in the past. Diggs, I think, has similar enough traits to 2019 John Brown. Definitely not a carbon copy, but I think Diggs does a little more as far as a rounded receiver. But the opportunity could be there this weekend if Brown's out for Diggs. I think a strong spot.
The next game, Chiefs Patriots. I have concerns about this game. From a stacking perspective, not concerns anything else. I mean, we're primarily on this show talking about GPP lineups and correlation. The pieces on the cheap side are expensive. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is 6,400. Tyreek Hill is under 7K. I mean, as one-offs, Kelsey, I could see one-offs on that side. And then we have the Patriots with Cam Newton. Then you got Edelman, you got N'Keal Harry, Damiere Byrd. The production could spread around, and of course, Cam could vulture production from the rest of his team by rushing. Do you see a case correlation-wise where in a shootout that Cam is the higher scoring quarterback than Mahomes? Because, to me, if the Chiefs are putting up 30 points and the Patriots put up 24, it's Mahomes with 350 yards passing and 4 touchdowns. And I know Cam has the rushing upside, but do you see playing a stack such as Cam, Harry, Edelman, Hill, or Kelsey, that type of stack, or playing the Mahomes, the 3-1 the other way, and then it's very expensive?
Well, I mean, typically Hill plus Kelsey isn't a pairing that I like. They tend to have kind of negative correlation, and that's, I don't know, you can stomach
How
that.
about Watkins? We have Watkins at 4,400.
Right. So I think if you were going the Kansas City side, you might be inclined to go, but Watkins negatively correlates
With everyone.
With everyone, yeah. When he has a big game, it's no one. So I think maybe going Hill. I mean, Hardman had a pretty good role last couple weeks. Maybe going there. My concern with the New England side is they just have a low total. I kind of have I mean, they're priced well, but I have a hard time seeing them really putting up enough points to support a full-on stack. I mean, I guess the way Cam beats Mahomes is if he's able to run in, multiple touchdowns, right? And
that'll vulture production from the rest of the team.
That doesn't seem, correlative with that outcome. Just doesn't work well for the pieces you would want as part of a New England stack, I guess. I don't know. I'm personally not too interested on the New England side. Maybe going something skinny like Mahomes, Hill, and either Edelman, Harry, or Bird. To me, makes a little more sense. I don't know. The Kansas City guys it's not a super correlative receiving core that makes it difficult, or I guess not difficult, but just uncomfortable to include many pieces in that receiving core.
Right. I'm more likely in this game to take like Watkins, Kelsey, and Hill as one-offs. And then just Mahomes is not the highest scoring quarterback, so I don't really care. Like, just can I get 40? Can Watkins have 6 for 80 with a touchdown? I'm good at 4,400. Can Tyreek Hill have 7 for 150 and 2 touchdowns, which he's done against the Patriots? Then I'm good. Kelsey, tight end position is scarce. So if Kelsey has a 100-yard game and a touchdown, he could easily just be the highest scoring tight end. And I'm just hoping that Mahomes doesn't have 400 yards passing in the process.
Yeah, and like the same could be said for the New England side. Like I think Harry, Bird at min price, like these are guys that I'm not necessarily interested in like stacking up, but could be like pieces to pull, as one-offs for other stacked lineups.
Okay, next game we have 2 more games to talk about, and then we'll throw the rest in. Arizona, Carolina. Would I surprise you? I know you don't look at a lot of content and you don't look at ownership projections maybe this early. Would you find it odd that the popular side of this game is Carolina?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, Kyler's been awesome this year. Hopkins has been highly productive. Drake has, let down, but projected well, I think, like definitely the last couple weeks. And yeah, so I found that a little surprising.
Well, Carolina has nearly a 24 implied total. It's a 51 overall total. It's a 3.5 point spread. The issue, it's not people liking the Panthers, it's the people liking the prices. So like Kyler's priced up now enough. He's 7K. Hopkins is 8,500. He's the highest priced wide receiver on the slate. They're obviously correlative. Drake didn't move up in price. He's 6K. But on the Carolina side, we have Mike Davis, DJ Moore, and Robbie Anderson all under 6K. And based on, most projections that you take a look at, Mike Davis is essentially playing as Christian McCaffrey now in this past game. So 5,700, if he's going to touch the ball 20 times, which includes like 8 targets, he's going to be popular. DJ Moore, tons of air yards, just not really bringing them down. I mean, he's a couple of plays away from possibly being 40% owned on the slate because he's underpriced. But that's the reason why he's underpriced, because one missed touchdown, a 40-yard catch, the difference between a bonus, that touchdown variance and bonus variance, it has moved his price down to 5,800. Robbie Anderson has actually seen consistent targets. It makes, from a price perspective, we may see not necessarily the Panthers as a stack, although I could see playing Bridgewater, doing Bridgewater, Anderson. You could play Bridgewater and you can play Davis with him also if you want. Playing 3 on that side and then just playing Hopkins or Drake on the other side. But you could also see Murray plus Hopkins and then play DJ Moore on the other side also. But I mean, the Panthers are priced in a similar way, stack-wise, as the Texans are, that we talked about before. I just think that Watson has a much more likelihood of being the highest scoring quarterback than Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah, sure. No, that makes sense. I mean, I'm just looking at our initial projections and we're projecting like Davis quite favorably this week. I think we were the same last week. Like, I don't know. I don't study ownership that closely, but I wouldn't surprise me if he's a popular guy. I mean, I don't know. You think the field definitely is wisened up to that. Arizona's like total is not like where it was last week. I mean, we wouldn't expect to see like similar ownership on them.
No, the Arizona side is going to be lower owned. Kyler's not going to be highly owned. Hopkins is not going to be highly owned. I mean, they'll be owned. Drake will be 15%. I mean, they'll get owned just as a stack. Like last week, I mean, we saw 30% on all 3 of their main players. And like, that's just absurd. We're not going to see that here. It's going to be on the Carolina side. Not as right as a stack. It's just, I see, if you're going to correlate, I see like a lot of Hopkins, DJ Moore lineups, Mike Davis, Hopkins, Drake, Robbie Anderson, like the 1-1 types. Or maybe people go, I mean, maybe this is the time. Kyler has been chalk on all the slates we played so far. People are going to either go up to Russ, they're going to go and they're going to play Watson underneath, they're going to play a cheap Ryan Fitzpatrick. Maybe this is kind of weird to say. I don't think I'm going to do it. Maybe this is naked Murray week. Maybe you don't. Maybe you play Murray as the quarterback, and then you play Davis and Moore on the other side as well, because that's what you do with like Lamar, right? You could play Lamar Jackson as a naked quarterback. He gets 3 touchdowns. Maybe that's what you do for. No one's going to do. I mean, I'm looking at the ownership, and who's going to do that?
Maybe you.
I don't know. It's very hard. I rarely ever play naked quarterbacks. I usually will pair them up with at least one receiver.
Yeah.
And the one receiver I'd pair him up with is the most expensive receiver, so it kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, it's a fairly expensive stack relative to just how likely they are to top the slate. Like in previous weeks, I think they were, live to, score the most points on Sunday. And I mean, obviously they have a shot, but it's, seems less likely this week than in prior weeks. And, their price, it's not like they're any cheaper this week, even though, there's so many other kind of competitors to be, a slate breaking, team. So I don't know. For me, like I would be more inclined to go up a little bit, up in terms of like, so I guess technically down in price, but pretty much like 2 teams that I'm kind of looking at around Arizona in terms of probability of scoring those points are Buffalo, and Cincinnati is less likely than Arizona, but also 2,000 or like much less expensive. Yeah, I think probably just interested in pieces like Davis. DJ Moore has gotten a lot of, like you said, air yards, and I think he's got the opportunity to put up a big score. But yeah, I mean, like you said, like Bridgewater as a quarterback doesn't really intrigue me that much. There are, I think, better options from that position. Seems to me more like a single piece type game than a stack it up kind of game.
Last game I wanted to talk about in full is Jacksonville, Cincinnati, because you brought it up before. I know you're smiling. This is I'm gonna burst your bubble.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This game started at 44.5. It's now up to 49. The Bengals have a 26 implied total. Jacksonville 23. Mixon is going to be fairly popular. I'm going to tell you that. I think James Robinson, I mean, you can play him at 6,500. I think there's just so many options between 5,500 and 6,500 that Robinson is not like you can play him.
Mm-hmm.
The burst your bubble part of this is even if Chark doesn't play for the Jaguars, feel free to tell me how to stack this game, because it seems like they both teams could throw to like 5 different guys. Like the production could be spread out to who knows who.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I kind of like it because we're just projecting Burrow quite favorably. And
Burrow, Boyd, Higgins. Is that what we're doing?
I don't know. I haven't really, and like I'm looking at our projections, we don't have super high grades on any of the Cincinnati receivers. So it does, you're probably, giving me the truth that I haven't done kind of the full research on, but
right. But you understand what I'm saying? That like I like the game. Like I understand why you like the game.
mm-hmm.
But like if you tell me it's like, oh, I'm going to play Burrow, and like he could throw to 5 different people. Mixon could get Vulture a touchdown. Jacksonville, you have Laviska Shenault, you have Cole, you have Eifert, you got that. No one stands out. No one has a target share really on either team that stands out as like alpha receivers. So like, yes, the game could go over. This game could be, 34-28, and literally no one gets there because it's like all different people.
We're not AJ Green believers.
Oh, I was an AJ Green believer last week. Maybe I'm not. Maybe not anymore.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, God damn. I'm sorry. I'm looking.
I curse all the time. Go for
it.
The show is called Asa, so why not?
Yeah. How did? Oh gosh. I mean,
AJ Green is a corpse. Don't worry about him.
I didn't pay that a close attention to Philly Cincinnati last week. How did Green in the first 2 weeks? I mean, his air yard share 45 and 42%. Week 3, 11.5%.
No, because Burrow learned that you
Yeah,
didn't see the first week. He just started jamming. He basically just had, tunnel vision towards AJ Green and
yeah,
just started jamming. Just wherever he was, he jammed him in. And it's not like AJ Green is good anymore to like get these narrow receptions.
yeah.
And yeah, that's how he got all his air. I mean, he's like Mike Williams. Like most of his air yards are uncatchable passes. So like in the data, it looks good. But then once Burrow found out that, oh, I could throw to Boyd and Higgins and multiple, Auden Tate was on the field, that he could spread it around, that like he didn't have to force stuff into AJ Green. And that's AJ Green just became one of the Bengals receivers. Is not anything special. I think Boyd is the more likely like alpha receiver in that group. So like if I do stack, and it's going to be Burrow, Boyd, and then you could skinny stack that. Only because I just think the production gets, if anyone's going to hit 100 yards and a touchdown, it's going to be Boyd.
Yeah.
And then AJ Green is probably still overpriced. Higgins got his price improved to 4,500. Like you could see a fullback scoring in this game. You could see like if Burrow is the highest scoring quarterback, it's quite possible that no more than one of his wide receivers is necessary because of how they spread the ball around. And you could say the same with Jacksonville as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. God, I didn't realize AJ Green was so not involved last week. That's
He
great.
was involved. He stood there and hopefully he didn't have to jump for anything.
No, I'm looking at. I mean, he recorded the most snaps he has all year, but I mean, set just like massive season lows in target and air yard share, as where Boyd's was on the field for fewer snaps, but I mean, just him and Higgins, I mean, just dominated. No, yeah, no, I don't know, maybe. I guess so. Yeah, Green does appear to be kind of out of the picture, but maybe Boyd and or Higgins. I know there was some, I think, bullishness around Drew Sample last week, and he did a whole lot of nothing.
He's a blocking tight end. I think people don't realize that when things happen in games, like I think you could take advantage of this in GPP's recency bias, like with KJ Hamler. I mean, he had an okay game last week. That in the middle, I don't want to speak like an NFL coach because I'm not. I don't want to say I'm expert in football. I'm just using logic. If an injury happens mid-game, like they've spent the entire week on a game plan, right, to attack this team, the playbook, what plays they're planning on using, and one of your guys goes down, this new guy is going to come in. Most likely, he's just going to be like, what we planned on, you fill that role. Yeah. So like Drew Sample was playing as CJ Uzomah. And then now that they have a week to game plan, Drew Sample will go back to being the blocking tight end that he is.
Go back to Drew Sample.
Right. So people are like, oh, Drew Sample's going to have a big role. No, they're just going to not plan for having a passing tight end. And yeah, do you take a shot in a stack? Sure, I get it. I played some Drew Sample, but I think taking those one game samples, no pun intended, like think in terms of, well, Cortland Sutton went down and KJ Hamler was just thrown out there. So he's running Cortland Sutton's routes.
Yeah.
And that's why he got 8 targets, because they don't have time to reconfigure in what they were planning on doing. And then the next week comes down and Hamler's the third receiver and Tim Patrick's getting more targets because why wouldn't he?
Yep. So one game we didn't touch on, I think you mentioned briefly, and the concerns with it are glaring. It's that, Los Angeles is 13-point favorites.
You could say the same for the Ravens. I know we didn't mention the Ravens because they're 13-point favorites. They both have nearly 30 implied totals. How do you stack these with? I mean, like my concern with the Rams, like my concern with both teams, the Rams and the Ravens, they're run first teams.
Yeah, right.
So like, what golf? How am I double stack? How am I stack? Either I'm playing a running back, I'm playing a one receiver. I mean, I mean, unless Washington or New York keep this competitive, like I just don't see how the game stack. What's the game stack? What wins?
Yeah. I guess, I mean, on the Washington side, you would need McLaurin or like Logan Thomas has been serviceable. But probably McLaurin. You need McLaurin to have a big game somehow. Yeah, New York side. I mean, New York has receiving weapons. Like you know, I like Ingram. I'm not saying for DFS purposes, but like he's a guy who can, make plays and kind of do stuff for his offense. But yeah, I mean the note about them being run first teams is kind of the concern. I mean, I have them in my notes. Los Angeles. We're having a third most likely team to top the slate. The pieces are fairly reasonably priced. Goff, Cup, Woods. But yeah, you would need in both those games, I guess, the opposition to force them out of what they're going to try to do, which is run the ball. I mean, so do you have between those two games? Is there any one that you think is more likely than the other, or has kind of more paths to bucking the huge spread and actually being kind of a closer game and maybe forcing the teams that we would want to play into a more fantasy friendly kind of offensive pace and strategy?
I think for the price, the Giants, Rams.
Yeah.
I think the Ravens, because it's hard. Lamar, like it's just hard. Like I'm never a big stacking fan with Lamar with Brown or Andrews, because now they're priced up. They're 6K guys, and
Yeah.
then the Washington Haskins is throwing the ball. I think it's more likely that if the Giants actually make this competitive, like the Rams have no problem passing the ball. It's just like if they're up, it's going to be Henderson and Brown. It's going to be whatever. But doesn't mean I'm playing golf stacks. I think I'm more likely to play this game as 1-1s, as play, what Ingram, Tate, or Slayton on one side, and then Woods or Cup on the other, and that's it. Like that, like 1-1. But I mean, if you want the pricing is, if you think the Giants, if you think the Giants keep up in this game and this goes over, I'm much more interested in Daniel Jones than I am Jared Goff.
Yeah, that's it's interesting.
That doesn't mean I'm going to do it, but
Yeah.
I'm just telling, because this is what, look at this slate. We're talking about a game that we don't think is like and it's a 48.5 total. On other slates, that would be like the third highest total game on the slate. On this slate, it's the 8th highest total. So I have to factor that in. It's not a matter of, the Rams have a 30.75 implied total. But like that isn't special in the slate anymore. I have so many that are close to that why am I taking a run first team at home with a 13-point favorite when it's not I have I could be contrarian with like 7 other games. I mean, that's why, like, even looking down, like this is not Colts, Bears, Chargers, Bucks. Like, no, I'm sorry. Like, you just get cut off. I mean, I could see if you wanted to play David Montgomery at under 6K, sure. I could see if Godwin's out, you take a shot on Evans or a shot on Keenan Allen as a one-off. But like, if those stacks win, then screw it. I mean, that because those games have 7 to 10 point lower totals. And it's not like we have 10 of those games and then two high total games. So it's like maybe one of those. But these 2 games have to beat out like all of the other 7 games. And I just think the likelihood of that is much lower than, I mean, yes, they could beat out one of the high total games, but not all 7 of them.
Yeah. No, with some of these teams you're mentioning, I mean, like Chicago, Chicago Chargers, less than 1% chance of topping the slate. Some of these other teams, Indianapolis, Tampa Bay is at like just under 3%. But yeah, I mean, just teams that, it would take, a real, I think, unusual set of circumstances, both in the games and also in like the games that pertain to the team, as well as, the whole kind of slate of games, that it just seems super unlikely that, these games are, in contention from a stacking standpoint. Like you mentioned, there are some kind of single pieces, but yeah.
So we know what's going to happen week 4. Seahawks, 48 points. Wilson, Lockett, Metcalf get there again, and I have none of it. And I'll be back on going. But there's no games here. There's no Titans-Vikings games. Like, I understand why the totals are this high in these games. So, like, that's why, like, there's nothing stands out. I don't have, like, a game that I'm looking at that I may have. I may have a very diversified player pool.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So in slates like this, would you say that, like your exposures on players are pretty low? Is that something you try to kind of force yourself, or more just the way that, you build lineups, it kind of turns out that way? Are there any positions that, you are willing to take on kind of more condensed player pool in a slate like this versus positions where you want way more diversity? Just curious to kind of hear your closing thoughts on something like that.
Well, I mean, I wanted to bring it up before because Brandon mentioned it in the first week, and Eric Beimfor tweeted about it, and I had a little discussion with him that the NFL has changed enough in the past 3 to 5 years, and most people that are playing DFS have played DFS 3 to 5 years ago. I'm leaning more towards the side. It used to be that running back flex was the way to go, right? That was, 3. If you could play 3 bell cow running backs, like, you're going to get the points and then take a stack and you're good, right?
Mm.
I think looking at, and I've looked at some of the data, but I mean, it's still anecdotal and small sample size, that lower priced running backs, because of the NFL and most teams playing in running back by committee, most teams, even if they don't have a running back by committee, the lead back doesn't get more than 65% of the snaps, that they play series based, or they have, a running back's in for 3 plays and then another running back's in for 2 plays, that the variance of red zone work is much higher at running back than it used to be. It used to be that when they get inside the 10, like, that's the running back that's going to be in. And now a lot of times it's like whoever happens to be on the field is going to be, carrying the ball inside the 10 and the 5, that the cheaper running backs have more probability of, like, in a GPP, you want to score like 20 plus points from every spot in your lineup.
Mm-hmm.
We used to think in terms of 4K wide receivers being boomer bust guys. Get a high speed guy that could catch 3 passes and get 1 70-yard touchdown and get the bonus and a touchdown. I think it's more likely that a cheap running back puts up a score similar to a 7K running back than a 4K wide receiver puts up a similar score to a 7K wide receiver. So it sounds weird to say that, like, on this slate, if I go and look at all the running backs on the slate, so we have like Kamara and Elliott at like 8K, that it's more likely. I'm not saying that it's likely. I'm just saying that it's more likely. Like, it's still low probability that someone like Myles Gaskin or David Montgomery or Adrian Peterson or like someone, Latavius, maybe not Murray, puts up a score equal to what Kamara and Elliott do, then someone like Danny Amendola putting up the same type of score that Tyler Lockett does.
Got it.
That I'd be more likely to build lineups that go contrarian cheap at running back and then just jam in 4 6K wide receivers and try to get 20 plus, 20 plus, 20 plus, 20 plus, and then just hope Jeff Wilson gets two. I mean, we saw it last week with Burkhead and Wilson and Davis. Like, they beat Sanders. They beat all the chalk running backs. Yeah. I think that's more likely to happen with running backs than it is with wide receivers in this day and age in the NFL.
So it seems like, correct me if any of this is wrong, but like historically the recommended kind of, I'm thinking about like, what's kind of the maximum exposure you're willing to allow at a position, and that's kind of inversely related to the width, I guess, of your player pool or depth, however, whatever spatially you want to think about it. Historically, it seems like, the prescription has been, keep it tight at running back and allow, the running backs you like to get up, pretty high in exposure, and then be, highly variable at receiver and just kind of cycle guys in, mixing and matching, but, keep exposure limits pretty low, coerce kind of that wide player pool at receiver. It sounds like maybe the recommendation might be now to actually flip that and be open to being, tight and kind of overexposed or heavily underexposed at receiver on the guys you like and don't like, and be actually pretty, restrictive in terms of exposure limits to coerce that kind of wide player pool running back. Is that?
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. Instead of me trying, I'm leaning more towards, instead of trying to take, if I have like a lot of Kamara and Elliott, I'm going to need a lot of cheap receivers.
Okay.
And it's like the old school GPP method is, we'll cycle through, put 8 in your pool and cycle through and hopefully find the one that hits. I think I'm more likely to have wider exposure at running back, and then just like I'll just look at the wide receiver pool right now, instead of having like 5% Golden Tate and 5% Curtis Samuel and 5% Danny Amendola and 5% Emmanuel Sanders. Like, I'm much more likely to just let's take a look at the top end and go, I'm going to have 20% Hopkins, 20% Lockett, 20% Hill, 20%. Like, I'm basically just jamming in all the 6K and above. Like, I'll have 10% Cup. And the cheap wide receivers, the only time I have the cheap receivers are in stacks. So I barely have any cheap, but the cheap running backs are the one-offs. Those are the ones that kind of get filtered in. So I have 8 lineups with David Montgomery, and I have 6 lineups with Jeff Wilson. He's not on the slate, but I mean, Adrian Peterson in 2 lineups for the Lions. Like, I just think it's more likely that AP goes for 100 yards and a touchdown because they just force feed him the ball. It could happen. He's 2% owned, and he beats out, the Kenyon Drake, who's going to be 8 times more owned, because Drake just, like, he gets 20 carries, but it's 75 yards and no receptions and no touchdowns. So, like, I'll save 2K there and then just make sure that I have as many high ceiling wide receivers in my lineup.
Got it. Cool. No,
I don't know if I'm right. I don't know. I don't know, but it makes sense logically from how football teams are playing in the NFL, where we don't have half the league playing guys that are playing 80+% snaps at running back.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, at least in my experience last week, you certainly were right. I had, high exposure and pretty tight at running back, and 2 guys I had a lot of were Zeke and Sanders, and that, did not go well.
Well, hopefully it goes well this week.
Yeah.
For week 4. If you'd like to contact Stewart, it's Start Gibson on Twitter. Start. I'm assuming because someone else had Stewart, because it seems like a name that, I mean, people have Jordan Cooper, so I couldn't use that on Twitter.
Yeah, no, it's that, and it's I had some family members have called me that over the years because they had trouble pronouncing my name.
Start?
Yeah, it's
really, it's called Stewart. How hard is it to pronounce Stewart?
Yeah, I mean, kids have trouble with pronunciation. I don't know. But yes, Stuart Gibson was taken, unfortunately. So.
Well, you can find him there. You can find me at Blender HD on Twitter. You can also find me in the premium Discord on RotoGrinders, which you would get with a premium subscription. I'm in there all the time. It's in the Blitz chat, the Bat chat, the NFL chat, any chat. You could always find me there. Subscribe to RotoGrinders Premium. You get that. That's part of your subscription. And you get $5 off a Core 4 premium membership to RotoGrinders. NFL, MLB, NBA, PGA, tons of content with tons of premium shows for NFL, tons of ownership projections, all lineup HQ access. You get everything. So use the link in the description below in this video, rotogrinders.com/media/ASA. So this has been the Advanced Sports Analytics Show. for week 4 on RotoGrinders.com.